So I'll quickly, well, you'll be introducing yourselves, then we will look at the questions that people have pre-sent, and we've got all sorts of brilliant questions. Thank you to people who sent those. And then if there are questions that have gone into the chat box, we will do those shortly after. So if I might hand straight over to you, lovely ladies. I've got Becky at the top. So Becky, would you like to go first and just do a bit of an intro about yourself and where you work and what your background is and why I've asked you to be here?
I'll keep it brief. I'm head of pensions and savings for Interactive Investor, which is an investment platform. It has an ethical and sustainable fund range, which you can invest in through your ISA, stocks and shares ISA, or your self-invested personal pension. I've actually only been in this job for 6 weeks. Before that, I was at Royal London, which is a large pension provider. And before that, I ran my own website, much like Ellie, called Good With Money, which is all about ethical personal finance, not just pensions, although that is what I specialise in now and what I'll be talking about mostly tonight, I think. So my background before that was personal finance journalism. I had a consumer champion column at the Times. I'm very much at the intersection of value and your consumer interests, and also sustainable choices. That, you know, way back, my background was, you know, environmental campaigning, and my first work experience was at The Ecologist and all of that, and I ended up in finance, and happily the two have rejoined back together, which is all down to Julia in one way or another. More on that later. But it's so brilliant now that there is this thing called green finance, and you can marry the two together. You know, they don't have to be in silo with each other, and that's what we're all going to talk about. Who's next?
Becky. Julia, you're next on my screen. Do you want to go?
Right, yes. Yes. Right. So I'm Julia Groves. Hello, everybody. I currently work in a fund manager called Downing, which I can't say. So really I should choose a company in a Northern Irish accent. We've got about 1.2 billion funds under management. And frankly, that's why I'm there, because I did crowdfunding for about 5 years, which is where I crossed paths with Rebecca O'Connor. Our theory of change was to get as many people as possible having a stake in a more sustainable future, because that would ensure that the government bloody behaved themselves. And it was really beautiful. It was lots of little community projects and lots of small investors, and it was adorable and fantastic and very, very hard work. I think I was about 2 stone lighter at that point. And so after about 4 years, this is a trillion of really kind of nearly killing ourselves, I thought I'll just try and fold in under a bigger company that's got the same kind of values. And so it just felt that the same amount of work was shifting a few 100,000, where maybe I wanted to be in a position where I could shift, you know, millions from that point of view. This is my partner in crime. Where is he? Look at that, staff. Thank you, Alex. He's bought the bottle. He brought a glass, and now he's learned his lesson. And he's just brought the bottle. He's also brought, just in case it's needed, he's brought a small puppy. So if I got massively off track, I could just bring the dog in from that point of view. So I am at Downing, don't tell them, to take the 1.2 billion in funds under management and move it entirely into sustainable investments. Not because necessarily I think that everyone cares or understands about climate change in particular, but just because I think if you don't look at where your money is, it's probably in a pretty horrible place. And even if you don't believe in climate change and you don't care about it, I think there's a real risk of people losing serious money because of the way the world is changing. So my focus now is around ESG, environmental social governance, but I want to maintain, Ellie, I still have a minimum investment of £100.
Good.
I just don't like this whole, you know, just because you're rich doesn't mean you're clever, just because you're not so well off doesn't mean you're poor. You've got to start somewhere. So it's really important that we keep finance democratic and accessible, because I think that in itself will change it if we all just roll our sleeves up and put our 100 quids in and get started. So that's where I'll be coming from tonight.
Brilliant, thank you. And over to Zoe.
So, hello, good evening, everybody. As Ellie said, I'm Zoe, and I currently work at Triodos Bank, which might be a bank that lots of people haven't heard of, but we are what's called a sustainable bank, and I've been there about 4.5 years. My journey back, so banking isn't a sector I thought I would ever work in again. I left the banking sector just before the financial crisis. There was no connection, just to be clear. On reflection, that was a good time to go. And back then, working in banking, it was the heyday, and I always talk about how all around the offices there were those little TV screens with, anyone remember CFAX, and directors would be constantly popping out their offices to check out the share price. And I worked for HBOS, we made a lot of money. And no one really asked how we were making all of that money. It was just a given that we made a lot of money every year. And actually, I had a great time working in banking from a kind of professional development point of view, but I was very glad to leave. And my route back into banking is slightly weird in that prior to this, I was working with the elected mayor of Bristol, who was an independent called George Ferguson. So I guess my background is more marketing and communications. My brief stint in politics was interesting and just reconfirmed for me why many women are too sensible to go into it permanently. And when my independent mayor, lost the election in 2016, I had heard of Triodos, and I think, if I'm honest, I thought there was some weird kind of green hippie. And lots of people I liked and respected rated them highly, but I really had no idea how they were different. And I certainly, if you'd asked me, wouldn't have gone back into banking then. But now feel really fortunate, and I'm slightly I get really overexcited about talking to people about, stop blaming the bankers for the structures we have in place. Take a good look at yourself, because it's your money, it's our money. And if we talk about having the banks that we deserve, as when and if there is another financial crisis, I think there's something about being able to look in the mirror and knowing where your money was and what it was doing when it was in that place. So great to be part of this evening's discussion, because let's be honest, it's not that sexy. I do get asked to talk about banking a lot more regularly now.
Zoe, how can the four of us not be sexy? I mean, that's just ridiculous.
I rest my case, indeed. We are. I talk about, why I'm at Triodos is to change the world via the conscious use of money. That's what I see my role as. And I live for the day when I won't need to work doing that job, because we will have successfully demonstrated to the industry that there's a different way of doing banking. I'll stop there. And I was already prepared with my glass of wine. There was no butler needed here in Bristol.
I quite like this. Money becomes far more interesting with a glass of wine, isn't it? But actually, that's not true. I think money is really important. People feel quite overwhelmed by not really knowing much about money, and that sort of rings through in a lot of the questions we got sent. So if I crack straight into those, the first one's quite general, and I've assigned it to Julia, but it may be that others have got quite a lot to say about it. So the question is, how important is money that's not being spent compared to what you are spending? So in the sense that lots of us are starting to become quite conscious consumers, how important is my savings, pension, investments relative to that? Yeah, I think that's the sort of crux of that question.
So my analogy is always the boots, right? So I have been known to spend, I'm sorry, I apologise, £250 on a pair of boots. One pair a year, it's a lot of money, but the really good ones can last for a long time. You don't go for a very high heel because you can't wear them enough, but I mean a working pair of boots. And if I put on that pair of boots, I will stand taller and I will swing around a bit, and I'll probably do my hair, and I'll just feel better, and I'll ponce about them, probably wear them constantly for about a week. And I'm enjoying the acquisition of the boots and how the boots feel about myself. That's the joy of consumption. There's this really bad book, you're too young, Ellie, to remember, called The Joy of Sex, which is one we always used to try and read in W.H. Smith when we were kids, because it was like the only rude book there was. Horrible pencil drawing about some extremely hairy people. I mean, just wouldn't happen these days. And this is what we're talking about, is, you know, the joy of consuming is you get this immediate hit and this feel-good factor, and literally your day has changed on that basis. I think that's one of the problems with money, particularly in a fairly opaque world, is you work really hard, you get paid, that's nice, you pay the tax, then you invest it, and then nothing, right? You can't see it, you can't feel it, you don't know where it is, you don't feel connected from it anymore. And then I think also, to some of the points made already, is you feel like a bit of an idiot because I don't really know what I'm doing, and you kind of maybe you talk to an IFA. I had one at one point, and I was looking at them going, you're definitely not as intelligent as I am. However, I really don't know what a bond is. So, and you kind of, you almost sort of delegate responsibility for your money to other people. And to the point Zoe's making about sort of, you know, taking responsibility for your money and where it is. Number one for me is being able to see where your money is. And that's the problem. If we were more transparent and you could see where your money is and what it was doing, I think it'd be easier to make a connection between how I want to live my life and what I do with my money. So I think, you know, some of us might start to consume differently, travel differently, you know, go semi-vegan or whatever I am these days, think about their consumption in different areas, and you kind of almost leave the money to the end, or your debt is equally valuable to the end, because it's just in the too hard pile, because we don't really know what to do with it. You could be really intelligent like us and super experienced and just have no clue how money works. And that was great when I met Becky actually for the first time, coming from a journalist background and kind of really getting to the grit of it and breaking it down quickly, I think is really key. So for me, it's finding tricks to look at your money and see what it's doing, and to get some of the joy out of that you might do out of, you know, like a nice kind of mid-heel LK Bennett.
I like the boot analogy. I definitely won't forget that. Zoe and Becky, did you have anything else to add on the sort of the impact of your money whilst it's not being spent?
Yeah, I'm sure we both do, but I'll start with pensions and then let Zoe talk about banking. To Julia's pair of boots, if you multiply that by 1,000, that £250 for a pair of boots, you've got a really good pension pot there. So, I mean, it's a really crude analogy, but that's the size of your impact with your pension. And you just can't match that with normal spending, unless, you know, you're Lady Green. But, you know, it's incredibly powerful. And actually your pension pot, and also your bank, where your money goes every single month, thousands of pounds go every single month, it absolutely dwarfs what you do. That's not to say all the spending stuff isn't important. That's still a vote with your money, and it will change behavior and supply chains. But your bank and your pension fund, it's not just a box in a room where your money goes. Those institutions are doing something with your money. Your pension is an investment, and it's an investment in companies. It's the companies that you buy from. You know, it could be Amazon, it could be Apple, it could be Unilever. It is doing something, and it's doing far more on a much bigger scale than you can do as an individual with your Christmas shop, even though all that action is still an important signal. And, you know, you kind of have to think about, you know, signals as well as, you know, actually moving the big, powerful pots. But yeah, it's hugely important. It's a real thing. You know, your pension is tangible, your money is tangible. It might not feel like that to you because it's going into a bank account and you just see the numbers on the screen, but it's going somewhere at the end of this long trail. And so I, you know, if we were going to have a debate about this, I would be of the view that it's way more powerful than any other thing you can do. Over to you, Zoe.
Like that. What about you, Zoe?
Yeah, well, I mean, we talk very much about how money is actually the most basic form of democracy, because what you do with it, where you spend, save and invest it really does have an impact. And I, you know, if I think about myself as a consumer, I think I spend very mindfully, as I think many people do now. They think, particularly going through coronavirus, we've all become much more about supporting local, wanting to support the real economy. So I think absolutely pensions are the biggest area. Sometimes at Triodos people will fall into the trap about, oh, you know, we're trying to change the whole finance sector, and I'm like, no, we're trying to change banking, because, you know, the pensions industry, that there's a whole other world of financial tools. So I definitely think pensions are really important, as are investments. And then equally, you know, even your savings, you know, the bank is lending that money and doing something with it. And 9 times out of 10 people won't have even thought about it. And I don't say that to be sort of preachy about it. I just think we've become really desensitized to even just, you put it in a bank, you know, why would you even think about it, you know? And it's not really something banks talk about, because they don't want to talk about it, because they don't really want you to ask. Remember, you know, when I parted company with a well-known high street bank, and I felt really sorry for the staff. And I was saying, they asked me why I was leaving. It was Santander. And I said,
Shocking.
did you know just how much this organisation invests in fracking? And that's not, and you know, and you see the discomfort and the squirming and the, you know, and I wasn't saying it to be particularly nasty. It was like, but my values are not aligned with your business principles. Therefore, I'm literally going to vote with my purse or my wallet or my savings, whatever, and I'm going to say, this doesn't work for me. So I think I tend to encourage people to think completely in the round, and not just about their money, where they spend from a banking perspective, but then I can go on into whether it's your energy provider, where you buy your food. There are changes you can make across every kind of, if you divide your life up into different, I was going to say quadrants, but we've probably all got more than 4 areas of our lives. There are changes you can make, and I think trying to get people's mindset to just embrace money and our money as part of that is a shift that I do think we're starting to see, in the same way that when I started trying to talk to journalists about the impact that banking had on the environmental crisis, that was a really tough conversation. Now people are really starting to get the role that banks and money play in tackling these types of issues. Sorry, I've got a bit macro there, but
no, it's really helpful to get the zoom out, because I'm not going to let you off the hook. I'm going straight back to you, Zoe, because if just name checking Santander again, if that's not a green bank, and we would say Triodos Bank is a green bank, what would define a green bank? And another question that we got sent was, how easy is it to move to a green bank? Because I think there's a sort of perception that's quite widely held that they're relatively obscure and you can't easily switch over. Is that true?
So you have to remind me. The first part was, what is a
what
green
constitutes
bank?
a green bank? Yeah.
And again, I don't want to sound like, you know, judgy McJudgy on other banks, because other organisations have got a journey to go on. Because I think the world is waking up to, because of things like that small thing called the climate emergency, that we're going to have to lift every stone, and we're going to have to really get to grips with what's going on. So other banks, and it doesn't really serve anybody to kind of knock what other people are doing. So the way that we define being, and weirdly, so we don't call ourselves a green bank. We talk much more about being a sustainable bank or a values-based bank, where we believe that banking should exist to put the impact of money on people and the planet before making profit. And that's the kind of antithesis. I can see people are saying they're finding me quite hard to hear, so I'm just going to plug my...
I can hear you okay, Zoe.
You got your headphones on? Yeah.
We had a comment from someone called Lorna Boyd, who said, you're statistically more likely to get divorced than change banks, which is quite good.
Certainly true, because did you know the average marriage in the UK lasts 14 years? And you are more likely to switch your spouse. So, I mean, to be honest with you, I'm a bit tired. It's almost like a joke. I get a bit bored of that, but it's a great statistic. Yeah, more likely to switch your spouse than your partner. So we call green banking or sustainable banking where you exist because you think money can have a positive impact, and it doesn't have to just be about making money. So I suppose we define our difference by being really transparent. So all of our investment portfolios, everybody can see what's in we offer 3 funds in the UK, very transparent who's in those funds. Our savings, so our business model is totally different. We take people's money in the form of, let's just keep it to straight banking savings, and we lend that money out, and we only lend it to organisations that are going to have a positive impact, whether that's socially, culturally or environmentally. And it's really simple because we pay a rate of interest and we charge a rate of interest, and the bit in the middle, clearly we're not a charity, we can't run at a loss, but the way that the bank is structured means our ownership model means we're owned by thousands of people across Europe who have invested in us as a bank. Their shares are kept in a foundation, so the mission of the bank can't be ever diluted. So that's who we answer to, and they didn't invest in us to get the best rate of return. They invested to get a fair rate of return because they want to see their money used for positive impact.
I think that's really important, Zoe. That ownership is massively important, because with all of finance, I think the best thing to understand is the questions to ask are, who is making money and how are they making it, right?
Yeah.
And if you are a big fat company traded on a stock market, you're on this kind of perpetual growth chasing, it's got to get bigger, it's got to be whatever. You just can imagine like a bunch of 27-year-old blokes like ringing bells and punching the air and let's get the deal, and because that's kind of what it's like when you get to that stage. So I think the ownership is really important, and also you don't have to have all your eggs in one basket. I mean, I got a NatWest account when I was 18, the day I went to university, and I've still got that bank account. I don't have any money in it though. All my money's in my Triodos savings account, and I just use NatWest for, because I used to be in an organisation called Move Your Money, which had this massive exercise trying to do the shifting. So you don't have to, oh my God, everything I'm doing is wrong, I've got to completely. You can just have little pots. We're very jam jarry as a country. You can just go to Zoe and go, right, Zoe, I'm just going to put my holiday pot with Triodos, or I'm putting money aside for the kids when they grow up. Yeah, and if you're like, oh my God, the direct debits are such a pain, leave them. Leave the direct debits in the NatWest world. But I do think we can unbundle it, Zoe. You don't have to move absolutely everything, but you could just take one bite and start, couldn't you?
I think, I'm sure, I'm sure I've got a few dormant accounts myself, because who gets round to making the phone call and then they say, no, you've got to come into the branch and sign the bit of paper, like who does that? But I do think, to the question about how easy is it, you mentioned there, Julia, about move your money and things, and it's like, the government has had the rather sexily called the CAS, the current account switch service, and that's been, that's been around for like 10 years, and it doesn't seem to matter how much that's promoted. People's perception is it's really difficult. Now, I wouldn't say I'm a current account tart, but for research reasons, I have switched my account a lot. And I'll admit, I was skeptical because I was like, oh my God, my direct debits. But now the system, maybe it was always like this, but the system is so clever, it literally sucks all your direct debits out as well, puts them into your new account, promises you that if they cock it up, they'll recompense you. So you're, if you've missed something. And it really is a doddle. And so, I don't know. We are one of the most inert countries for not switching. But like Julia says, you can play around. Not play around, what I'm saying.
Kind of. I mean, we don't have to. We're so, I was just terrified of it, right? It was all just a bit too. I don't like things that I don't understand, and the terminology is intentionally kept complicated.
Absolutely.
Becky's bugbears, I know, is to try and make it more sort of accessible, but it suits financial advisors to keep it complicated. Who can afford a financial advisor these days?
Yeah.
Right?
Well, I mean, all too often, you know, as a 46-year-old woman, I phone my
stop
dad.
showing off about your youth and your eyelashes. Honestly, 46.
But you know, it was up until fairly recently. Yeah, I would, and I was fairly intelligent in these topics, but I'd still feel like, oh, I better just check with my dad because I know he's done a lot of research into this stuff. And there's this perception that there's all these well, because there are quite a lot of smoke and mirrors, but there's a lot being done to demystify that. And as you said, asking the right questions, using, you know, the internet's a wonderful thing. It's but like you said, Julia, I like the point about not being too purist. I was, not to name drop, but we don't do private banking, but occasionally I have weird and wonderful requests. And I was talking to quite a well-known, would you call them a pop band? Music, let's just call them musicians. And they were switching some accounts across, to Julia's point, and they were upset, like they had really complex foreign exchange needs in the way that the average punter doesn't need. And they were banking with a well-known high street bank. And to Julia's point, it was like, just leave it there. If the money isn't sitting in that account, if all it's going to do is take some international payments and then go somewhere else, you're all good. Just use the payment mechanism, because it's what the money does when it's in there that is the issue, not just the flow through, if you're going to be really purist about it.
I'd also like to make the point, if you're a customer of a bank or another pension provider and you can't move your money, because it's not the same with pensions. Some people really can't move their money out of a pension scheme for lots of really good reasons to do with guarantees and all sorts of stuff. And that's really frustrating if you really want to move your money. But that's okay, because you can lobby harder and more powerfully if you're a customer of an organisation than if you're not. You can make yourself a proper nuisance on Twitter directly. You know, that is also a powerful mechanism for change. In my view, it's not the best, but if you're stuck somewhere, that's what you've got at your disposal. So don't kind of be too disheartened if you can't move your pension or your bank account. Julia's gone purple. Oh,
that's an exciting comment.
I think it was Zoe, because Jeremy Duke has asked, said about that we have quite a lot of inertia about moving banks in the UK. Is it less the case internationally?
I can talk more to Europe, and I'm afraid, sorry, Jeremy, I haven't got all the stats to hand, but what I would say is the banking system across Europe, we operate in a number of countries. They're very used to paying for their accounts, so that's obviously not a model we're very familiar with in the UK. And I do think, because they're used to paying and they're often used to having to pay for the use of cash machines, there's a bit of pain if you don't shift in a way that there isn't in the UK. So I'm sorry, if you want to pop an email in somewhere, I'd be happy to send you any more stats, but I haven't got anything else off the cuff.
Thank you.
You know what I mean?
I think it's a bit of both. Becky, if we can follow on from your pension point, because it leads really nicely to some questions we had about pensions.
Okay.
So, I mean, I was definitely in this boat at the beginning of my third maternity leave, and I had, I think, 3 pensions, didn't know where any of them were, and spent literally a year trying to find them all and put them in one place. And so my question to you, I think, is, what's the best way to find out where your pension is, or your pensions, and how can you move them? Because you alluded to not always being able to move them.
Yeah, so the average number of pensions in a working life, according to the Pensions Policy Institute, is 11 or 12.
No.
That's a huge amount of admin that you could possibly have to do at the end of your working life. So it's kind of better to do it earlier rather than later in that regard. But I think
not these days.
Well, it depends on all sorts of things. It depends on, how many places you've worked before, what type of schemes you had. In all likelihood, you have a mix of schemes in your past, so it gets very boring very quickly. But okay, Arcadia today and Debenhams today, thousands of people, their pensions went to the Pension Protection Fund. They were defined benefit final salary schemes. for lots of people, that's what they think of when they think of a pension. They think of something that they pay into, that's run by their employer, and they get some guaranteed income at the end of their working life. That's not what most people have now for new schemes. But if you've been working for a long time, you may have some of those schemes in the past. Those schemes are very difficult to move because they offer you guaranteed income in retirement, which is very valuable, regardless of, you know, how ungreen your pension may be. You know, you would be committing retirement suicide to move out of one of these things in most cases, and that's why a lot of people are now advised not to, or they can't find an advisor to advise them to move out of them. But increasingly, people have what's called defined contribution, which is where you pay in a certain amount and you don't know what you're going to get at the end of it. You just pay in a certain amount in the hope that you'll get one of these 3 amazing forecasts at the end. They're easier to move in theory. Sometimes they have to find benefit elements to really mix things up and make life difficult. Regardless of what type of pension you have, though, your experience, Ellie, is normal, because old traditional life company pensions, and I've been talking about this today actually, we launched a report on transparency at life company pension providers. They're paper, they're analog, they're not digital, they're not, you know, even if you want to move to a digital provider, they're just going to provide you with documents and PDFs that you have to manually sign. Maybe they use Adobe Sign now, but you know, maybe not. And scan back. No fax now, but definitely a scan back. And the whole thing takes ages. Sometimes you need an advisor, sometimes you don't. At best, I would say it takes 6 weeks. So that's not to say you're spending the whole 6 weeks doing that, right? It's just paperwork and admin. So it does depend on your propensity to deal with paperwork and admin at any one time in your life. And right now for me, that's 0. I mean, I can't do anything. I can't do my Christmas shopping. I've just started a new job. It's mad.
Yeah.
You know, nothing's happening. But you were on maternity leave and you felt able to tackle that because you didn't have, I mean, that's the hard place to be, but you didn't have loads of other stuff going on at the same time.
It's fair to pick things up. Yeah,
there are times in our life when this stuff seems like it moves up the priority list, and actually during the pandemic stuff has been moving up people's priority lists, like pensions and like moving bank accounts and like increasing your savings contributions or whatever, because we've had time to think about what's important, and that is not just our own financial security but more ethical solutions. So it's a lot of it is to do with having some time, but also a little bit of willpower to get through the paperwork, to battle through what is sometimes deliberately obstinate obstruction from your provider, because they, you know, they can't be bothered with it either. They're just much happier if everyone stays as they are and nobody does anything. It's easier, isn't it?
I think, Becky, it's also from a parental point of view, isn't it? Because I think that's, I don't want to be morbid. I'm not a morbid kind of person, but my parents are definitely having conversations about estates and pension and to be honest, and maybe that's just me, but it's just a little bit top of mind, isn't it? And like, we're all locked in and we can't go clubbing as if I went clubbing anymore. So it's a good time to get the admin in order. So I mean, I've definitely had some conversations with the folks about, you know, where they're at and readiness, and you know, it's quite terrifying, you know, Dad, like, well, I've had this meeting about this equity release thing, and you're like, you know, because if we think we're bad, my parents, I've got a doctor and a teacher, they have no clue about money whatsoever. They're appalling at it. So I think pensions are very, very powerful and very important, but it may be somewhere in between Zoe and Rebecca. Something that's fairly easy and lower admin maybe would be to start with an ISA. So, you know, we can open an ISA every year. We can put 20 grand in every year if we have 20 grand. How very lovely. But the key thing about an ISA is you can normally move an ISA whenever you want to. You know, the most important thing is, to whatever extent you can afford to do it, you put your money into any ISA you want. I mean, the child trafficking drug, arms, BP, fossil fuel ISA, I don't mind if that's sooner when you can get it into on the day, because you can move an ISA very, very easily. And then the mistake that I made, obviously I was so clueless, was I didn't realize the difference between, you need to subscribe, you need to put your money into an ISA before whatever, the 5th of April. And then once it's in that account, you can choose what you want to do with it afterwards. And I kind of felt like I couldn't do my ISA until I already knew exactly which stocks and shares I was going to buy and were they the right ones and were they the wrong ones. You just have to open the ISA, get your money in, pour another glass of Majestic Sauvignon Blanc, and take your time to think about where. Obviously, you don't want to leave it in cash for too long, because it's not earning any money. But that might be an interesting starting point for people to transfer an existing ISA. And again, the government's brought in some, a bit like switching Zoe's bank accounts, not quite as quick as switching bank accounts, but there are some requirements now about how quickly you can move ISAs across. And I just think it's your money, and you worked for it and you paid tax on it. And, you know, you should be in a position where you can, you know, take what the government's encouraging you to do in terms of, you know, 20 grand a year. So it's a lot of money to save every year. Use your ISA allowance. Don't use it on a cash ISA, please God, because bugger all tax-free is still bugger all. Why would you protect 0.51% a year from tax? I would argue use it for your investments. That's not the same thing as saying is don't have savings. I'm saying if you've got a tax wrapper which says you're not going to pay tax, don't pay tax on the 6%, don't avoid tax on the 1%. But maybe, guys, that's an in-between space where somebody could start, where they could move their investment and maybe see a bit more where it's going. I don't know. What do you think about that?
I think it's a great way to build up confidence, especially if if you've got small amounts spare. Put something in regularly, direct debit, it's done automatically. It's much easier to set something up than to move it. That's very true. And it just helps to get you used to investing in general, if you've not done it before. So yeah, I think it's a great halfway house. I can't argue with that.
On that question of sort of easy access savings that are relatively locked in, one of the questions, actually 3 of the questions we got were all the same, which was how green is NS&I and premium bonds? Now I get told, so I was told by my financial advisor that I just didn't have enough money to worry about it, so stick it in premium bonds, which was about 3 years ago. And I'm now really pleased because we're spending it on a renovation. But is it a good place to put money? Is NS&I a safe, ethically minded place or not?
The NS&I is the government, basically. It's it's as good, it's as green as the government. And the government, the government's doing some good green stuff now. But but the rates are rubbish. I have to say, they were really good in the early stages of the pandemic because the government wanted more money from us all because it needed it, and everybody else was dropping their rates. NS&I's rates were really high, couldn't really cope. Its rates are now really, really low. So we're never going to fall out of love with NS&I. It's the national savings institution. It pays people thousands of pounds when their numbers come up, and we love it. It's neutral. It's at best as green as the government, I would say.
I don't love it. I do not love it. I do not love it because, we talk about the risk of losing money. And if you put your money into a bank account and the bank account doesn't give you at least the same interest as inflation, then you are guaranteed to lose money, right? So
some of them do though, Julia. You literally have to put your money away for 7 years to beat inflation if you want it in a safe place.
Yeah, so I mean, I think in that situation, so my view is it green? Unless I can tell and I can see where it is, it's not. So in a Triodos environment, right, I would be fairly confident, because I'm obviously a cynical old bag, but I've read everything, met all the guys, I'm pretty confident they're not going to put my money into something that I'm not happy with. Don't have the same level of trust. I apologise for this particular government. not many governments overall. So for me, whilst I want to have some savings, because savings, of course, are covered by the Financial Services Compensation Scheme. So anything up to £85,000 that I have in savings on deposit is covered. So if the bank just went tits up, and let's not pretend that's never happened, then I'm going to get my £85,000 back from the government. So I'm not anti-savings at all. But I do kind of look at it and go, well, what is the point if my money is just sitting there? I can't see where it's going. I can't influence where it's going. It's not even coming up with inflation. And I'm deeply suspicious about all the fees and everything that go behind it. So for me, I would rather I kind of keep a certain amount in savings. Yeah, it's all right, Zoe, you've got it, right? Can you just look on your computer and just check that it's all still there? Because that's mine. It's called Jules's runaway money. That's the account I want you to look at. My runaway account, very important to have that.
I'm flattered that you think I'd know how to use all our core banking systems. But anyway, yes, keep going, Julia.
Girls' runaway money, very important. But I would rather just put some of it to work and maybe take a little bit of risk. And feel really happy about where it is, and earn Becky and I worked together for a while, years ago, trying to go for like these triple bottom line returns with People Planet Profit and everything we did. I run a bond platform at Downing. We've done about 150 million over 4 years, and the average return is 5.36%. Wow. And I know where every penny's gone. I know every company that's been into. It's all British stuff. It's mostly energy. There's some care homes and other things in there. And I'm frankly a bit pleased that we've managed to put 150 million and get of that 100 million back without anybody losing a penny. Past performance is not a reliable indication of future performance. Into stuff that we know works. So it's kind of important. So do think about the FSCS. You cannot lose your money, your capital, if it's in a savings account up to £85,000 with the people under the same banking license. Bit trickier. So NatWest and RBS are the same banking license. So I think, I don't know, Coots, Drummond, somebody else will know. But is that right, Zoe? Under a banking license, that £85,000 is safe.
That is correct.
Per person, per license, is that?
But I think that is the key thing. It's people's perception of risk and security. So people perceive, if they don't know about all of that stuff around the FSCF guarantee, they just see that the government, that this kind of like, you know, it's safe and secure. So I was going to be really harsh and say, if you have no imagination or appetite to find out anymore,
which I think is a lot of people.
Which is a lot of people. I've had them myself. Ernie never came up with my numbers, and I just got frustrated by that, frankly. So to Julia's point, with interest rates being as chronically low as they are, why not? I love Julia's boot analogy, but it's amazing. So confession time. Technically, I'm not a very good saver, really. I don't think I'll be alone in that. But I have got a lot better at saving since I came to work at Triodos, because I genuinely get, rather sadly, a bit excited about what my money's doing. And maybe that comes as you also start to get a bit older and you're thinking about the future. I mean, I would totally agree with Julia on the cash ISA front. I'm like, why? Just why? But hopefully that's answered that question.
Absolutely.
Sorry, Ellie. Rebecca was also talking. You were talking about the kind of compounding effect. You were talking about maybe 1,000 pair of boots. Not even I have. Maybe Ellie has 1,000 pairs of boots.
Not anymore.
So for the young people, right, who are 25, say, Rebecca.
Just like me.
250 quid going into a pension when you're 25 actually could be quite significant, right? In a period.
It makes a huge difference. I really wish I'd understood this earlier in life, and hadn't had to make up for it now, basically, when I'm nearly 40, and, you know, took time out of pension saving for kids, when I went freelance and self-employed for a long time, didn't pay into a pension. Luckily, I did actually have a really good pension in my 20s. But making up for it, you know, I'm having to contribute quite a lot more to my pension now. And that's a shame, because now I'm, you know, I could be spending that money on other things like a bigger house or, you know, whatever it is. It makes so much difference to max out your contributions in your early 20s when you start work. So much, I can't tell you. Even if it's just £25 a month extra, you know, the difference in your eventual pot is like £100,000. You know, it's very little sacrifice earlier on. So yeah, I mean, that's massive. It's compounding. It's a very boring mathematical formula, but it, you know, over a working life, which is now from 21 to 68, you know, you've just got loads there. And the more you put in earlier, the more options of freedom you have later on.
But doesn't this link, Rebecca, I think, sorry Ellie, stealing your question, Master, but someone asked a question about financial education.
Yeah.
And this is where I get really miffed that we're just not, like, there's some, when I started earning money where I felt I had enough to start saving, and I was like, I don't understand, how much should I be saving? How much should I be putting in investments? And when you actually Google it, because what can't you Google anymore? There are sort of exactly the advice you're giving about if you save £20 of every 100, whatever. And I'm like, why wasn't I taught this at school? Why when I started working, did I not have, and it wasn't that I lived in a house where we were particularly squeamish about talking about money, but if I'm honest, we didn't talk about money. I can't tell you even now what my dad earned, because we're still quite British about not talking about money. And I love that someone's asked that question, because one of my real hobby horse topics is I really want to see this stuff taught in school, because I want children to believe it's their money, not the bank's money. They're perfectly well equipped to know what to do with it, because that's where I think you'll drive much more systemic change around banking structures, when we have people that don't feel uncomfortable or like they're silly because they don't know what they're doing. Because if we were all fluent in the topic, we wouldn't feel like that.
And, you know, I bought a house when I was 18. I didn't pay for my university, right? My kids, and younger people, your children. I mean, I really worry, sorry to just go off on a 30-second rant, I worry about the number of humans on the planet and the rise of automation, and whether all of our children will have full-time jobs. And, you know, actually, when I look at my parents retired on their bloody house. And he was a GP. You know, and how does that compare to millennials today? What's coming out?
Well, he probably had a nice defined benefit salary, Julia, didn't he?
that was very, very nice. However, I can tell you now, it was still the downsizing of the house that made the difference. So if you start with debt when you're 21 and you don't get on the property ladder, I'm just saying it's such a different experience. And actually, I think to Zoe's point, the importance of needing to understand how to grow your capital and ultimately generate income from money. Maybe we could end up with, ubiquitous income across all of us. I'm just not sure that in 20 years' time, all of these kids will be working 5 days a week with any form of pension. And so I think it's a life skill. It really is to know how to invest. But if you start with a small amount of money, I do think you learn very well by completely losing all of your first investment.
It's a good
Wrongly recommend getting it really badly wrong, because oh boy do you learn quickly.
Yeah, I mean, it's probably a good thing. Maybe part of the financial education package should be giving everyone 100 quid as their part learning, and see who does
At Downing, we give everyone £100 when they join, on the condition that they blog where it goes. You would not believe some of the things.
Really?
There's so much Bitcoin going on. It's terrible.
Well, it's quite exciting. And back to just to finish off the pensions question, then, if we were to not that you'd be able to recommend specifically, or maybe you can with pensions, but is there a sort of generally good pension that you'd say people can trust this? It's a good place to stick your money if you've got a choice.
He's not going to answer that.
You're right, I can't say that.
Well, who's good? Who are there that you can point to that's good guys?
Well, I mean, it really depends on how much you want to do it yourself, and whether or not you've got if you've got an existing workplace scheme and it's generous and your employer is putting loads of money in, that's free money. Don't turn it down. Don't do anything with that. Stick with it. And if you want to lobby on your pension fund being greener, then do so. but don't give up those employer contributions. If you're self-employed or you've got old pots and you want to move them somewhere good, look at the charges, look at the performance of the funds, look at the choice available, look at how transparent it is. If you don't feel it's transparent enough, smell a rat. You know, why are they not telling me what I want to know? Why they're not giving me the top holdings? All this stuff should be easy to find, and there are providers out there who make it easy. If you want to do it all yourself, I work for an investment platform. It offers self-invested personal pensions. You do have to do your own research, and you have to be able to identify risk levels of funds and put your own portfolio together. You can choose ready-made portfolios, but it does require a greater level of activity and interest from you. Okay. But you can make your pension net zero tomorrow if you wanted to do that. So,
and on the whole, if you wanted to look at this, you'd say a good rule of thumb is if you can find out a lot about it, chances are they're quite transparent. So yeah. That's
you want to be able to easily find information about the top holdings, who those companies are, what their sustainability rating and record is, without having to go to the annual reports of every single company that you invest in for yourself. It is possible. There are good providers out there, but if it takes you more than 10 minutes, I would say, to get to the top 10 holdings, go somewhere else.
Okay.
Just done that exercise, Ellie. So we've got 7 funds now at Downing, and I've just been through the kind of ESG exercise. Possibly the most fun I've had in my professional career. But to Becky's point, I mean, probably 3 hours per company, realistically, to go and have it. And these are listed companies who are supposed to have lots of disclosure and be very transparent.
Right.
We've got a tool called Sustainalytics, which we used as a first pass, and it throws up potential alerts, and then we go in and probe and do a bit more. But I mean, you know, terrifying. Some terrifying things that you know are just below the surface. I mean, the whole industry, I think, runs on things being a bit opaque. So I would say exactly what Rebecca says. I think it's easier to audit a manager or a house maybe than individual stock. So maybe you want to choose an investment manager or a fund manager as an individual who says, I'm going to pick stocks that X, Y, and Z. Look at what's called like the mandate for the pension or the fund. Because it is, I do think, Becky, it can become a full-time job trying to stay on top of all of that. And if you're, green and pleasant is lovely, but I'm equally not madly keen that my pension goes into companies where the board's all men or where the CEO earns 2,000 times what I just actually at this stage in life now bloody care how they're, because I don't want to be part of the problem, and if my money is there facilitating stuff which I find slightly nauseating, then my bad, right? It's just not acceptable. But I think so SIP, I do mine in a SIP. I've got mine, just for transparency, I've got mine with Rathbone, Greenbank, because I'm so conflicted about investing in anything. I have to go through gallons of paperwork to be allowed to do. Triodos is fine, that one's approved, but anything else is an absolute nightmare. So I've had to delegate my money, can you imagine unbearable control needs, to Rathbones, but they have a Greenbank, and they have this fantastic questionnaire where you go through all these lovely ethical questions about what you care about with your money, and surprisingly, I don't care about everything equally. I would have gone, yeah, ethical, here we go. I don't give a shit about some of those things. Whereas others are really important. It's a really interesting exercise, because you're going to go, right, under no circumstances will I touch this. I'm not really keen on that, but go on. If it's
Well, yeah, but you're a human. I think that's really important. It's quite nice to hear that they've got a questionnaire which doesn't say, okay, so you're into green stuff, therefore you care about X, Y, and Z.
Yeah, and also you're not into green stuff, therefore you're a mug. Let's try and get the Because, I mean, I was around the first time this happened, and the problem with all the ethical funds and the green stuff in round one was either they were green and really crap returns, or they said they were green and they totally weren't. And so less for you guys, but for like the financial advisors who were there the first time, their arms are just crossed and they're like, and so that's part of the hangover, I guess, from maybe greenwash, maybe sort of 10 or 15 or 20 years ago. But I would agree with Rebecca that if you can't see where your money is, I would say also that employees these days have got far more influence on their companies than we ever had. Honestly, these millennials, I'm like, outrageous, their demands are outrageous, and they literally say to us, well, I'm not joining a company whose pension isn't in X, Y, and Z. So on a micro scale, Becky, you know, on the one hand, yes, we can all, dear, you know, Schroders, I own 0.0000001%. I feel very strongly that. But if you're an employee of a company, first of all, you know lots of other colleagues. We could get a little bit of collective action going. And I do think it's much easier to get somebody else to move your money for you.
Can I unpick that question about, Becky, you said earlier, lobbying, you can lobby either your pension company or the company you work for. If you're not an activist type and you care about your pension, you think it's probably not quite invested how you'd like to, what can you do? Like, what does lobbying look like for someone who's not going to go and sit in a boardroom with a banner?
You'd be surprised at the level of response and discussion that happens at even large companies when a few people start to directly confront them about something that they haven't been confronted on before. And that's a really positive thing. You know, big pension companies aren't full of evil, lazy people just sitting around, you know, raking in fees. They do care, but they need to have a business case for that care to be made manifest. And so if they can say to their marketing manager or whoever it is, the head of risk or whoever, this week we have had 5 tweets from people saying that they can't find the top holdings and whether or not we invest in fossil fuels. Yeah. And they'll go, oh, that's really interesting. We've not had those questions before. Yeah. Let's do a webpage for those people. And it really is that simple. I know that, you know, they're very large companies and they have thousands of employees, but you know, through the powers of social media and other ways to make your disgruntlement public, and it doesn't have to be in a horrible, mean way, like, oh, you're invested in fossil fuels, I hate you, you're really bad. It can be, you know, just like, hey, I noticed that I couldn't find information on whether or not my pension is invested in fossil fuels. Would you mind providing me and thousands of other customers with this information about our own money, please? Yeah. And then they go, oh, okay, yeah. Why don't we provide that?
Well, sometimes they need permission. I mean, the regulations honestly seem to, I mean, I used to be a mad fan of regulations. I'm slightly less keen at the moment. It's gone absolutely ridiculous in terms of protecting, I think, the investment companies and not protecting the investors at all. But the challenge is, if you are the investment manager or the pension, right, Becky, and you're making selections and decisions on behalf of other people, right? I've got their money. I've got a fiduciary duty to choose for them, right? I'm going to go for the best possible risk-adjusted return, as in what's the least risk I can take to get the best possible return back. That is my starting point. Yeah. For me, these days, I think we can now, certainly from Downing's point of view, since we became a responsible investor and as we integrate ESG, I can now legitimately say, all right, we're choosing an investment between company A and company B. Company A has a huge amount of single-use plastic. Company B has switched to cornstarch. Company A made an absolute killing last year, but its entire fleet is diesel and all the deliveries are in central London. And Company B has already had a really bad year last year financially because they switched their fleet to electric vehicles, right? Mm-hmm. I can look at those two and I can look at it and go, right, well, Company A may look phenomenal to the stock market, but if I'm thinking about long-term business model and profitability, I'm guessing it's not going to be acceptable to have masses of single-use plastic, and maybe people might stop buying that product. I'm guessing that landfill is going to get more expensive, not less expensive. I'm guessing that some of these environmental impacts, which are external to the company, are going to become internal. And so that looks like the best buy, and I'm not going anywhere near it. To actually go one step further and then go, right, let's try and work out what the solutions are that are coming along. Let's try and invest in and find the opportunities around climate change, which are huge. The more permission I have from my investors to do that, the better I can do it. I need to go back to the FCA and go, actually, I don't care what you say. You think I didn't give them the best risk-adjusted return. Well, let me show you what my perception of risk is on a 10-year, 20-year timescale. And let me show you what the investors are asking for. And I am delivering against the expectation of those investors, because they've clearly told me they do not want their money in that crap. So yeah. we must feed back to the people who are making decisions with our money on what we care about. And it doesn't need to be that much, as Becky says, but please God, do that, because, you know, even just a dozen letters and you start going, look at this, worm is turned. I am not doing my duty if I don't follow the mandate of the investors.
But I think the gap is that, I mean, I've interviewed all three of you and I still forget this, that as a pension holder, I am an investor in a company. I think that is so detached from what we're feeling. We know we have a pension, we think we've got a pension, we kind of know where it is, but we don't think of it as something that invests on our behalf into companies. It seems very, very separate from ourselves, doesn't it? And I think that's the financial education piece that we really need on the pensions.
And that's something that employers can help with, because as far as you're concerned, if you're employed, your pension arrangement is through your employer. And actually the pension provider behind it, you might not even know the name of the pension provider behind it. It's just your work pension. So there is a role for HR departments in this as well. And it's a very underdeveloped area to have more information to hand about people's pensions and their options that they can give them directly, because they're like the middle link in the chain. And a lot gets lost in
a selling point on like Sunday Times best employers list if you started to introduce financial education as part of your package to employees.
I think more are looking at it, particularly larger employers, and it's kind of it's financial capability. So it's around if you're struggling really with budgeting or, you know, your bills, then your employer can help with that kind of thing. And I think there are financial education packages too, but it's mainly the large employers that run these, because they're the ones that can afford to invest a bit in this kind of financial education as a retention strategy for their staff. And so I mean, if you're kind of middle-sized small business, probably not going to get that.
But, you know, it's definitely something that should happen. I've got a few more questions that are a bit more specific, and we're slightly running out of time, so if I crack on with some of those. Julia, I think you've covered a couple of them from people that have sent them in, but I've got quite an interesting niche question, which is, actually I've got two. One is, Downing talk about renewables in their energy investments and infrastructure investments. How do you feel about non-weather renewables such as nuclear?
Well, look, how do I feel about it? Sorry, let's go faster. So look, I think we need massive electrification of both transport and heat networks, right? Big time. And if we want to be able to meet the demand for levels of electricity, but also hit our net zero targets, it's a massive amount of money that's got to go in, and I guess nuclear is a low carbon solution from that point of view. I get very upset about Hinkley Point and pre-agreed prices for electricity and massive overspending and delays in projects and all the rest of it. And I just do kind of look at it and go, we've got like an unlimited supply of wind and solar. Why would we bother? Whatever else would that be? So like, it can be part of the mix. It may need to be part of the mix. It doesn't really solve any problems, because if you look at the profile of when the nuclear plants are going to get retired and the new ones coming through, there's going to be a bloody hole anyway. So I'm very big on renewables from that perspective. And then, you know, we're hoping to I can plug it now because it's too late now, unless anybody wants to invest in the next 24 hours, but we're trying to do this £100 million, what was I thinking, renewable energy trust, which we want to IPO on Thursday night. Most terrifying thing, don't do an IPO. I'm literally crumbling from the stress of it. You can't even see how much you've raised. But what the strategy there with Door is to diversify the technology. So you need wind, you need solar, you need geothermal, we've got UK, we've got Nordics, because basically it's sunny in the summer and it's windy in the winter. And if you want stable income, which is, you know, fairly consistent through the year and year to year, you need to mix up all the technology. So I think overall, the size of challenge we've got, nuclear is probably going to have to be in there somewhere. I just think it's appalling value for money.
Agreed. That was a really, really, really good answer, actually. Zoe, I've got some specifics on Triodos. I'm going to try and bring two questions together because I think they're slightly related. One is Triodos has a global fund which invests in large corporates, green ethical corporates. What is your split across major continents? And the other is somebody's thinking about moving their cash ISAs to Triodos and split their options, but they're now holding their horses because they're worried about after Brexit and the currency exchange, because you're a Dutch bank. Should they worry? And is Brexit going to have an impact?
Yeah.
Okay, so if I go with the first one, so that was about our investment funds. So I would say
it's across the international waters.
All of our investment funds are delivered by Triodos Investment Management, which is based in the Netherlands. We offer 3 funds in the UK. All of them are impact funds, but for shorthand, Equity, Pioneer and Bond. So we've just introduced a mixed bond fund. I would probably say if whoever asked the question went and had a look at Triodos Investment Management's web pages, everything is findable within the web pages in terms of what is made up of those portfolios. And it is interesting because sometimes people get very upset about some of the larger organisations we have in the portfolio. So I think from memory at the moment we might have Danone, we might have Adidas, and people will forensically go into the operations of those organisations. And I think the reality is, if you tried to put together a fund of absolutely pure, ethically clean as the day they were born, those organisations don't exist. But there is a journey to be gone on. So our fund managers obviously do an awful lot of due diligence and will know exactly what journey an organisation is going on. And then we do use our voice and our investments to obviously lobby for change within that process. So that's where I divert that question, that individual. And the second question is really easy because there is nothing to worry about, because we became a UK regulated bank back in May 2019. And for those that may not know, so as soon as the UK indicated it intended to leave the European Union, the regulators, for many sectors, there's been this horrible hiatus of like, what on earth is going to happen and what we're going to do? Banking was not one of them, because the regulator was not going to allow any. So, you know, probably like the next day after Brexit, the UK regulators were in touch with us to say, now about this passporting arrangement you've got with the Dutch. So we're now 100%, we have our own, we're still a wholly owned subsidiary of Triodos Bank NV, but we're fully regulated by the PRA and the FCA here.
So you count as equivalent to a native bank?
Absolutely. So what Julia was talking about earlier about financial compensation schemes, interestingly, many of our customers prior to this were not concerned that we were part of the Dutch deposit guarantee scheme, which had a similar, well, in fact, a slightly lower level of cover. But now we're all part of the I always get it wrong, the FSCS. I always say it wrong. I've learned if you say it with enough confidence and panache, it doesn't matter. But I think tonight I probably should get it right. So there isn't anything to worry about.
And that, just to clarify, because we touched on it earlier, that is the £85,000, is it, that we're talking about?
That's right.
Per person, per institution.
Okay, so you could have £85,000 if you were lucky enough to have it in savings in two different places, as long as they weren't the same institution and company, sort of parent owned. Is that right?
Yeah, so you can check if who's the parent owner on the FSCS website.
Yeah.
That was new to me literally last year, so I'm glad that's come up. And then Julia, there's another international question which I think would be good for you, or maybe others chip in if I've got the wrong person, which is that somebody says, I have some investments in the UK and some abroad. The UK ones went down by about 5% this year and the others increased by about 40%. If you wanted to do green and overseas, where would you go?
Absolutely the wrong person. No idea.
Does anyone have something to say on that?
Sorry, I'm UK. Just do UK.
Fine. I'll go back to that person and say we need another specialist on that one.
Yes.
You can invest in global equities through funds that are available in the UK.
Right. Okay.
If that helps at all, that's one way to gain global exposure through global equities funds.
Right, well that's the end of our questions. So if anybody else has a last question, then type it in. Otherwise, I think we've covered everything. So before we go, I'm going to spring a question on you all, which is if tomorrow everyone who's been listening and who's going to watch this on record could do one thing with their money, what would you suggest they do? And I will start with Becky.
I feel like I have to lobby for my cause, but
It's your time.
At least find out who your old pension providers are, and whether you're in a defined benefit or defined contribution scheme for each. Just acquaint yourself with where your money is now as a first step.
Yeah.
You need to do that before you can do anything else, and little bit at a time, so you don't get too daunted. Just one little thing a day or a week.
Yeah, or a week. Once a week. Okay, brilliant. Zoe?
I think we've talked about ISAs, and I would definitely say if you have an ISA, then definitely consider where it is and what it's doing. And I would say also be prepared. Don't switch banks to Triodos. We might not be the right bank for you, but really look at your own situation and think about, there's an awful lot out there to make things more transparent and straightforward and easier for customers. So just take a fresh look and be prepared to make a change. Embrace being a banker.
Brilliant.
Because we're all bankers, right?
Yeah. Julia.
Sorry, Julia, it's true. We're all bankers. It's our money.
Just before we get Julia's top tip, there is a question about greenwashing and challenger banks. I can't see the question. Can anyone see the question?
Yeah, I can see it in the Q&A. I'll answer them really quickly, Julia, if you want now, before you do your one thing. So how do you avoid being greenwashed by sustainable funds? Having done high-level reviews of several funds, I found companies within them to be wanting from what I consider a sustainable point of view. I am really sorry to say there is no shortcut to doing your own research on this question. You can go by reputation of fund manager, but even that, you get some really popular fund managers who offer sustainable funds. They're very reputable. They've done well by people for decades, but they're not doesn't necessarily mean that they're very good at sustainable. And sustainable to one person can just mean investing in fizzy drinks companies because they have a recycling policy. It's a very broad church. The only way you can unpack the greenwash is to look at the holdings and find out what the companies do for yourself. I'm afraid there's no way around that level of work. And the other quick question on challenger banks was, so they're new, they're fintech, they have no legacy. The big high street banks have a huge amount of legacy. Zoe, you might want to answer this one too.
Well, yeah.
So they're at best neutral. They are making sort of greener claims as they realise that this is an area that they could be good at. I saw something from Tandem earlier, and I was kind of thinking, well, yeah, but what actually do you do that is green or sustainable besides not be bad? And I think just not being bad is not quite good enough anymore. It might have been good enough in 2016, but it probably isn't now. So they're not bad. People are really interested in it. One of the top searches on Google is Monzo ethical, and they're not, but they're not are either.
It is quite amazing. I'm quite impressed at the at how that. So first off, I have no issue with all the fintech challenges in that I think we welcome the disruption to the market. Anything that gets consumers thinking. I think they've got a great app with some brilliant budgeting tools. And that's really positive. But what I ask is what sits behind that. What's the mission and purpose of that organisation? Where is the money going? And it does slightly irritate and gall when they're classed in this ethical, the same ethical category, because as Rebecca said, they're not necessarily doing anything bad. Although I would say some of their policies around, for example, how they respond to fraud. If fraud is an issue across the banking sector, you may find yourself more vulnerable with some of the fintechs, let's just say that. But equally, they're not doing anything with your money that really classes as being ethical. I just think people have confused the transparency of the app with the sensation of somehow that feeling cleaner. And obviously they set out to be, their whole journey was, we have no clue how to be a bank, come and help us, and etc., which was a great way of breaking down some of the barriers.
And with those challenger banks, correct me if I'm wrong, but aren't most of them backed by big high street banks anyway?
No, they're backed by lots of. They're very capital rich with investment. But to my mind, I would say, correct me, like you might know more, fellow panelists, but for me, they're a bit like the Uber of banking, where I question what money they're yet making, but they're just very, very well capitalised and resourced.
We don't know who their investors are. Well,
I think they might be quite.
VC, yeah, they're not the nephews and nieces of the big bad banks. There's a lot of venture capital money which has gone into it as well. And Zoe's right. I mean, they're not making money. It's a hell of a thing. You have to be extremely bloody minded to decide to launch a new bank.
Yeah.
Anywhere with regulations and all the rest of it. And I think, if you speak to like Ricky Knox and all the guys, it's a heck of a thing. So they won't all make it from that point of view. But I think that actually most of them, there is a degree of purpose for the entrepreneurs, because you just wouldn't get through all the hurdles that are in place unless you really, really believed that there was a better way of doing it.
Yeah.
I would definitely echo that. Having gone through full subsidiarisation with the UK regulator, it is not a job for the faint-hearted, and there are hoops and hurdles, and for sure.
And then finally, before we close, Julia, you've still got your top tip, but somebody has asked here, can you tell us who you invest your funds in, Julia? Is that quite a long answer?
No, really boring. Wind, solar, hydro, things you can kick, stuff you can drive up and have a look at. You'd be tempted to take a panel and put it in the back of the car. I don't like contracts for difference. I don't know what a derivative is unless I've had 3 coffees. So I just like real things in the real economy. The sun shines on the panel, it makes electricity, it goes down the wire and you sell it back in. So I'm afraid I think probably about 50% of Downing's assets are purely renewable energy and going more that way. So that's our thing. So top tip. So I honestly think you should take an amount of money, whatever it is, and properly invest it. Don't worry about the wrapper. Don't worry about the ISA or the SIP or the switching of the bank account or anything else. Just go and find it. So Downing Crowd is ours. There's abundance. There are amazing platforms that do solar panels in Africa. Do you know that it costs £350 to provide solar panels for a family in Africa, which allows them to charge their phone and have lights so the kids can study in the evening? £350. And you can earn like 3% on that. So I would play energy crowdfunding with an amount of money that you just are assuming is a complete write-off, and see how you feel. See if it changes how you feel about your money and the difference it's making, and lose it if you're going to lose it, or make it if not, and build it up from there. But more importantly, Ellie, unless anybody in the call has got £100 million, in which case could they call me immediately? Can you send me good vibes, right? Good, seriously good vibes, and we're going to get another 100 million into renewable energy assets by Thursday. I think if we all just like hum or something, it will happen. I don't even care if it doesn't, because the raison d'etre for so many of us here is to try and make a difference and move the money and shift it across. But I do feel that if people could just, you know, send some biorhythms or something,
Lovely.
that would really help.
Maybe we'll send some biodynamic wine and it'll do the same thing.
Brilliant, even better. And then I can celebrate or commiserate. Love it.
Yes, one way or the other it'll work. Okay, I'm going to wrap up there then. That's been absolutely fascinating. Thank you all so much for your time. Thank you to the audience for your questions and for coming along, and for all the feedback. And it's just, I mean, I've learned so much, and I hope other people have. And if people still have questions after tonight, or they wake up tomorrow morning and think, I wish I'd asked that, then ping me an email. Everyone's got my email address and I'll pass it on. But it's just been brilliant. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you, Ellie. Thank you.
Thanks, Becky. Bye, Zoe.
Bye-bye. Bye, Julia. Bye, Becky.
Cheers.